Firstly, apologies for my voice. I did indeed develop a very sore throat yesterday that made the Virtanen video as well as the Suzuki's thoughts on KK video one of the most pain-enduring things I've ever had to do while recording those videos, but today it's kind of developed into more phlegm being built up in the top of my sinuses, and as a result, there's no pain, but my voice is a lot more limited in what I'm capable of saying. It'll probably be like this for a while, not counting the pre-recorded videos I made earlier last week, so apologies for that. But as we go forward into today's topic, I wanted to talk a little bit about, firstly, just the hockey world in general, because we had ourselves what was a pretty interesting trend come about that has gone on, let's say, the past few years, pretty much. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, that is okay, but I'm 100% sure that you have definitely seen this trend pop up somewhere on social media in the hockey world the past few years. Anytime we have a young NHL forward who a lot of people think is going to be a star sign a contract, there are usually critiques coming about that saying, oh wow, what a great contract. It makes that Mitch Marner contract look terrible. And that's kind of a trend that I've noticed in the hockey world the past few years, is that the Mitch Marner contract is seen as this benchmark, this extraordinarily big deal amongst other NHL fans, as being the prime example of a contract that is so astronomically large, despite being so short for the size of the contract, that it's pretty much just the epitome of a quote-unquote overpayment. We had ourselves the Andrei Svechnikov contract signed a few days ago, for example, and when that was signed, everybody was like, oh my goodness, that Marner contract is looking worse and worse. And it's gotten to a point now where Mitch Marner, don't get me wrong, he's a good hockey player, he's a 90-point guy, he's fantastic, even though he is all that. He is seen as this example of an overpayment because he's making $10.9 million until 2025. He's going to be a UFA when the contract expires, and the contract wasn't even max length when it was signed. It was actually 6 years long. And so, with Marner's body of work and everybody talking about what he has done, what he is, you take a look at the fact that he is the second highest paid winger in the entire National Hockey League behind Artemi Panarin, and you say, man, is this guy really the guy to take the second overall spot in terms of money handed out to wingers? Well, we have ourselves what is a big piece of news for another star winger in the National Hockey League who is close to signing his contract, and everybody is talking about this potential move as one that is so bad that it kind of matches that Mitch Marner contract in terms of the magnitude of the player compared to the dollar amount. Let's go back over to Minnesota and talk about Kirill Kaprizov, because we had ourselves what was Frank Seravalli and his tentative agreement tweet that went out there and really put the spotlight on the Kirill Kaprizov and the idea as to whether or not he would go back to the KHL. That idea was shot down a few days later by CSKA Moscow themselves, despite the fact that Seravalli's initial tweet said that Kirill Kaprizov would go to the KHL should an agreement between him and the Wild not get done by September 1st. Well, guess what? It's September 1st. There hasn't been a contract set in place yet. He hasn't signed anywhere, but we did have ourselves an update here from Michael Russo making an appearance on K-Fan. Regarding the Kaprizov deal with the Minnesota Wild, he said this the other day: they're not close, but they're very close. They've compromised on term, pretty much at 5 years. I think the money is going to be in the $9 million AAV range. Now, they're working on a final agreement and structure, which is not going to be easy, but they're kind of there already. Now, what does that mean? They're working on the final agreement and the structure. Well, when you have a contract, sure, it's easy to say 5 years, $9 million AAV, $45 million contract, but when it comes to the year-by-year basis of that contract, how much you're making in year one, how much you're making in year two, signing bonuses and all that stuff, that is a completely separate part of the contract negotiation process that does need a lot more ironing out than just saying, okay, 9x5, $45 million contract, 5 years, and we're done. It's a lot more difficult that way. And so with this Kirill Kaprizov idea coming back out here, the proposed contract being a 5-year-long deal with a $9 million AAV, we had a whole bunch of people coming out there and talking about whether or not this contract, should it be signed in exactly that way, is going to be like the Mitch Marner 2.0 contract, because the amount of backlash that I've seen for this Kirill Kaprizov proposed contract idea from Michael Russo has been astounding. Everybody's going out there saying, oh man, 5 years, $9 million a season? What an overpayment for a guy who only played 50 games in the National Hockey League. How in the heck are you going to give $9 million to a player who was under a point per game? This guy completely didn't show up in the playoffs. 3 points in 7 games. Are you kidding me? $9 million a season? And it's kind of funny to me how everybody has so quickly jumped ship into talking about how Kirill Kaprizov is going to be overpaid just based off of the stats and the money that he's apparently going to get. So much to the extent that people are talking about Mitch Marner again and asking whether or not this is going to be the second coming of that overpaid winger who's buying himself a contract of free agency that is going to be extraordinarily expensive. So for Kirill Kaprizov, I'm just going to go out there and I'm going to say this right away. $9 million for Kirill Kaprizov is a pretty big deal. It is. It's $9 million. There are only so many players in the National Hockey League who have $9+ million attached to their name as an AAV. Kirill Kaprizov, while maybe not having the biggest sample size amongst those guys, was indeed arguably the best Minnesota Wild player that team has seen in years. One of the most dynamic and lethal guys that just went out there year one, was the best rookie on this team since Marian Gaborik, arguably better than Gaborik, and Gaborik was a pretty gosh darn good star for the Wild back in his heyday. And you take a look at where things are right now, Kirill Kaprizov was able to do what he did, under a point-per-game season, first-year NHL eligibility, while playing with Victor freaking Rask. Like, do you know how much skill it takes to go out there, play with Victor Rask of all people, and have the stat line that Kaprizov did? This guy came alive playing for the Minnesota Wild, and he's gonna go out there and he's gonna get better. Plus, if you play this guy with Marco Rossi instead of Victor Rask, just imagine the production that can come out of that. Oh, but Lego, he's only played 50 NHL games, and he'd played in the KHL the rest of his career. He was only a point per game in the KHL 1 year. And sure, that may be true. He may have not had the best development, I guess, in terms of sample size and body of work compared to other players who are getting similar amounts of money. But I'm going to say this, if you're the Minnesota Wild, if there is a guy to go out there and pay $9 million a season to, it's Kirill Kaprizov. Like, no questions asked, there's nobody else in this roster who deserves that amount of money, and Kaprizov is the only guy who I think even comes close to arguing that amount. If he goes out there and he gets 100 points next season, you're not going to complain about this $9 million contract anymore. And I guess I can understand why people are bringing this up in terms of Mitch Marner, because Marner signed a similar deal that took him to UFA status, and he's making a boatload of money too. But I think everybody can kind of agree that Mitch Marner as a guy was just overpaid in general because Kyle Dubas is Kyle Dubas and he did the thing. Like, I don't know if anybody's going to go out there and argue that Mitch Marner's contract is going to be worth it, even though he is a 90-point player at his best, making $10.9 million a season. Do I think this Kaprizov deal will be that bad sometime down the line? I don't know. I mean, it's possible. If Kirill Kaprizov maxes out at like 65 points, then sure, $9 million could be seen as an overpayment. But I don't know if it's ever going to be seen in the same magnitude as the Mitch Marner contract is, because for Mitch Marner and his $10.9 million salary, he's really going to need to explode next year, maybe get 100 points, and really just dominate in the postseason to even make his contract a shed of worth it. Because as I said at the beginning, we see this all the time. Anytime a young player signs a contract, it's always, wow, this contract looks so good compared to Mitch Marner. Mitch Marner is the one that everybody talks about as being the bad contract, and now Kirill Kaprizov, in the eyes of some people, could be seen as the second coming of that kind of contract. However, I'll say this, I'll end this video off by saying that he is probably, I say probably, not guaranteed to be, but probably going to live up to it. He was that good with Minnesota last season, and I mean, sure, you would have liked to say $7 million, you would like to say 7x3 or whatever, but at the end of the day, you know, Kaprizov and his agent, they both wanted to go bridge, they didn't want to go long-term. Everybody was kind of talking about, oh, you signed Kaprizov to a $9 million by 8-year deal now, and you just forget about it till 2029 rolls around. And in fact, this contract here with Kaprizov, should it be signed the way that it's laid out right here by Michael Russo, would have 2 years of UFA status bought out, because it would take him until he is 29 years old. So that's kind of a similar range with Mitch Marner, actually, because Marner, he expires in 2025, he's 24 right now. By the time his contract expires, he'll be 28, 29 years old, so he'll be in a really similar boat to Kaprizov. So, who knows? Maybe this is a lot more similar than we thought it would be, but either way, talk to me in the comments what do you think about Kaprizov, the new contract rumored to be, and Mitch Marner and the reputation that his contract has garnered, so much to the point that this Kaprizov contract is kind of mirroring that situation quite heavily. Do you think there's a link there? Do you think I'm just pulling this out of thin air? Talk to me in the comments what do you think. I hope you enjoyed this British Rolls 99, and bye.